Welcome to today's video about English opening, and today we're gonna take a look at the reversed dragon. Now this is a variation that happens after the moves c4 and e5. So if you play the English opening, the question here is if you want to first play knight to c3 or first g3. You know, basic ideas, fianchetto your light square bishop, put your knight to c3. But which one do you want to do first? Well, I would recommend you to play g3 first. Because if you play knight to c3, you know, black has some ideas with bishop to b4. You have to learn that, and also other stuff that we're going to see in this video. So that's why we just play g3 here, and we're going to transpose basically into the same position. So now here black plays a move knight f6, okay, a developing move, and we just develop our bishop to this g2 square. And the line that we're going to look at today starts with the move d5. And this is basically similar to the Sicilian dragon, but with reversed colors. Now, as you can see, black has a pretty strong center, so we want to take this pawn off the board, and black recaptures. Now, of course, we have to develop, and our move is going to be knight f3 here. Knight to c3 is also fine, but it's giving black some other options. He can also take on this c3 square if we play like this. And of course we're not going to capture with the d pawn. We don't want to allow this to happen. So we would take it with a b pawn. And this is an okay position, but I mean, why would you give black so many options if you can just play knight f3 and don't exchange this knight here on b1? So you're basically attacking a pawn here. And of course e4 is not possible because of a queen check here, and when he, I don't know, blocks the check, we just take this pawn here and we're a whole pawn up. So this is not possible. He has to protect his pawn with knight to c6. And now a normal move continues with castles. So you may think about what are we going to do with this b1 knight if we don't want to trade it off for this knight here. How are we going to develop this knight to this c3 square if black just stays here and doesn't move the knight? Now, as you can see, we have an arrow here. We're going to play d4, basically striking at the center and trying to create black some problems. Now, the most common move here is actually to retreat to b6 with the knight, but let's see what happens if black plays a move such as bishop to e7. He just waits there with his knight on this d5 square. Now here we just play d4. Now taking the pawn, basically that's great for us because we get our knight to a very nice square here, and it also opens up our bishop. Okay, obviously if we're on move, we would just you know, take this knight here on c6. But we don't have any real problems here. We can play like knight to c3, even if we get an isolated pawn here. I think it's not such a problem. I mean, this position is just fine. So he would usually put the pawn to e4, and we just move our knight to this e5 square. Now we're also attacking this e4 pawn. So in case black defends it with f5, we can of course now take the knight. Black recaptures, and queen to c2. Now you can see that black has some weaknesses, and we're also planning to play f3 here and open our bishop. So that's a pretty nice position here for white, and it could continue like queen to d6. We develop our knight to c3, just normal stuff, and I mean, we have a slightly better position, which is alright. So that's one line. When we move to this e5 square, if he takes our knight, then we obviously recapture the knight, and as you can see, the e4 pawn is hardly going to be defended. So, for example, if bishop defends it, I think we could just play something like queen to a4, I think, and then pick up this pawn here. So, yeah, this position is just fine. We don't have any problems here. So, yeah, I mean, if he plays bishop to e7, remember to just play d4 and strike at the center. But what about if he plays e4 in this position right there? Now, this isn't the same, of course, we don't have a check and capture because there's a knight here. But what we have is a free square for the knight that we didn't have before on e1. So we can move our knight to this e1 square. And again, we're attacking this e4 pawn. That's a bad side of advance of this pawn. We're attacking it now, and he has to somehow protect it. Now he can do it with knight f6, and now, as you can see, we can develop our knight to c3 finally, and also attack the pawn. So after bishop to f5, really trying to protect the pawn, we can just play d3. We're basically also activating our knight. After the pawn captures, we capture it with a knight. And let's just see how the game might continue here. With bishop to e7, a normal developing move. Queen to b3, attacking the pawn on b7, activating the queen. Also probably preparing something like rook to d1. We have an advantage here, so that's a pretty nice line for white here. And if he tries to defend his pawn here with f5, then again f3, just trying to, open our bishop here and also destroy his strong pawns here in the center. So that's a nice move. And if he plays bishop to e6, we can of course take the pawn, and after he recaptures, I mean, you can see that black really hasn't solved the problems with f5, so this is even better for white. Now, okay, knight protects, we castle, and the most common move here is knight to b6. That's our main focus here because that's mostly played. Because as we saw, if he doesn't do this, we just play d4 and strike in the center, which is now not possible because, as you can see, he has 3 protectors of this square, and we have to find another plan here. And of course, now knight move to b6, it's no longer looking at this c3 square, so we just develop a knight. Now some normal developing moves follow, like bishop to e7 and d3. Now black castles, just normal stuff. And the question of developing our dark squared bishop, like I said in the basics video, it's a lot of times not obvious where to put this bishop. But in this variation, it goes to e3. Now, as you can see the arrows, one plan for white is basically to just put the rook on this c1 square, on the half open file, play a3, b4, and put this knight on this nice c5 square, from where it's, attacking this pawn, and it's just a very nice piece. So this is one plan for white here, and let's just take a look at this plan. Now first of all, it's black to move, so he just develops his bishop to this e6 square, and our first plan, as I said, is to play rook to c1. Now here it might look hard for black to find a great move. The most common move is actually to put the knight back on this centralized square on d5, but this is not a problem for us. I mean, we're kind of forced to take this knight because he's also attacking our bishop, and we would of course not want this bishop to be captured. So we take the knight here, he recaptures with a bishop, and now we can play a3. So let's just take a look at an example game how this continued. Okay, here black just developed a rook to this e8 square, reasonable, and we can see queen to c2, connecting the rooks and just, developing a queen. Now we can see bishop to f6 with the idea of playing a knight to d4, which would be pretty nice for black, because, we would be forced probably to take, or, I mean, this would be a very nice square for the knight, so we don't want to allow this. And now our plan here is going to be to play knight to d2 actually. It looks quite shocking because, as I said in my first video, we usually don't want to trade our English bishop here, which is not only a very good piece on this diagonal here, but it's also the main protector of our king. But here in this example, our king is not going to be in danger, and we're going to get a pretty good knight. So that's why we did this. And here, okay, black played knight to d4, and this looks pretty dangerous. So we're just going to chop this knight off with bishop takes d4. Now he first takes our bishop on g2, and we recapture, and he takes the bishop on d4. Now we get a knight versus a bishop position, but this knight is going to prove more useful than the bishop. So here, as you can see, the c7 pawn is hanging, so we take it, and black also recaptures our e2 pawn. And now we actually can exchange the queens and put our knight to this c4 square. Now black wants to fight for a foul with rook to e8, and after king to f3, white has a slight advantage, because as you can see, what is black even going to do in this file? He basically can't do anything. And his bishop is kind of bad because he has this pawn here, which is kind of limiting his options, because it's on the same color, and our knight is really better here on c4. So this is a position that you might get, which is I think fine. So let's go back here to this point. Now here we looked at bishop to e6, and we set rook to c1, putting our rook on this half open file. And we said the most common move is knight to d5, putting the knight back in the center. But what if black here, instead of bishop to e6, plays rook to e8? You can play rook to c1 with the same idea of putting a knight here, and again having a reasonable position. Or you could also play d4 in this position. After black takes, we're going to get our knight to a very nice square, also open our bishop up, and we're, as you can see, threatening to take this knight, because we also have our bishop looking there. So he has to take the knight, and we recapture it with a bishop. And now black really has to stop this very nice bishop on looking down on this diagonal with c6. But now after the move e4, grabbing more space, and as we can see the plans here, with playing the move f4 and e5, also playing the move queen to d2, a developing move here, and b3, white is basically going to get more space with this, and also limit the opponent's pieces. So as you probably see, this is a pretty reasonable position for white. It looks slightly better for white, so I think this variation is nice. Okay, so let's go over it again, and I just want to mention that I forgot one option for black, but it's a pretty bad option, so yeah, I'm going to show you why. Now again, we play c4, the English opening, our opponent plays e5, and we play g3, avoiding any stuff with bishop to b4. And again, if we played knight to c3 here, as we're going to see after knight f6 and d5, we would prefer our knights to stay on this b1 square, and we would not like to just exchange it for this knight immediately in the opening. So that's why we just play g3 here, and after knight f6, bishop to g2, the normal developing move, d5, the reverse dragon. Now we take the pawn in the center, black recaptures, and now not knight to c3, which is also fine, but knight f3, giving black less options. And again, we set e4 loses the pawn to this trick, and we just take this pawn. So he has to protect the pawn with knight f6. Now we said we just castle. So here we said that if black doesn't retreat with the knight to this b6 square, if he plays something like bishop to e7, we strike at the center with the move d4. And again, if he pushes the pawn, we go to e5, and as we said, this is a completely fine position. After, for example, knight takes, we take, this pawn on e4 is going to be pretty weak. So bishop to e7, it's not really the best move for black. But here I forgot to mention one line, which is with bishop to c5. And now this is not a very good move, because as you might see, we can just take on e5, and after he recaptures, d4. Now we're forking the bishop and the knight, as you can see, he's going to lose one of them, and this is not great for black here, of course. I mean, if he takes, which he can't, we just take it with our queen, and we're attacking both of the knights, and he's going to lose a piece, so he can't actually take it. And I mean, if he goes somewhere, for example, I don't know, somewhere back, we just take the knight, and we're a pawn up. We're also like, we have a nice bishop here at this diagonal, and we have better chances for a win. So this bishop to c5 move, remember this idea of taking the pawn and forking the pieces. So yeah, that's why the most common move here is actually knight to b6. But again, e4 here in this position results with knight to e1 and this pawn being weak. Whenever he pushes the pawn to e4, remember that this pawn is probably going to be pretty weak. So now he has to defend it. We said he can defend it with f5, which doesn't bring him anything because of the move d3. Trying to open up our bishop and just get rid of his strong pawns here, which are going to result in a weakness. As we said, he developed with just take, and again, he didn't solve any of his problems. So that's why the most normal move here after castles is knight to b6. Now we can't play d4, but we can play knight to c3 and finally develop our knight, because he's not threatening to exchange the knights. So now some developing moves happen, of course. Bishop to e7, e3, castles, bishop to e3, and we can see here the plans. Again, we want to put our knight to this nice c5 square. Sometimes it's even possible to do it with a bishop. Bishop to e6, a normal developing move, and rook to c1. The best move here is, I think, knight to d5, putting the knight to the center. And here we looked at the line with takes, and with the idea of basically, you know, going into an endgame with our knight against this bishop here. So let's just see that again. Knight moves. We surprisingly exchange our English bishop and also our bishop for this knight. So a lot of exchanges happen in this line, and again we get into this position where the knight is a little bit better than the bishop, and he can't do much on the e file. So these were some variations to play against the reverse dragon, and this is actually not the only way of playing against it. And if you would also like to see the other ways of playing against it, please write down in the comments, and I'll probably make it. So I hope this opening video was useful to some of you that want to play the English opening or to play against the English opening, or if you just wanted to get more knowledge about different openings. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.